Hi everyone and welcome back to another recent read. It has been a while since I've done one of these, so I thought I'd sit down and film another one. I'm going to be talking to you about two non-fiction books, two fiction titles. Two of them are going to be audiobooks, and one of them of course is an Agatha Christie, and then one is a book that I read on my Kindle and one is a book that I have a physical copy of. So I think we should start with the audiobooks, and the first one I'm going to start with is The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. This is a Miss Marple, and it was one that I gave 3 stars. Now, of all the Miss Marples that I've read, I think I've given like 2 of them 3 stars. I'm sure the other one has been a short story collection, so it's saying a lot that a regular story got 3 stars, because the rest of them I've been given 2 stars. They've been so long, so boring and so pointless to me. So yes, this is definitely one that I enjoyed well and above the others. And the reason for this one is I think it's so clever, but also it's got like a really good like revenge plot that just so happened to happen, and it was good. Like the overall plotting of the story was really good, because I feel like the Miss Marple ones, the stories have been like just really shit. And then like how Miss Marple sort of figures it out and things like that, I actually thought it very much had a lot of allowances for you as the reader to solve it as well, whereas I feel with a lot of Miss Marple stories you don't get that. So the book is about a woman named Heather Babcock, who we meet her sort of a little bit in the beginning, but the main part of the book then takes place when she attends a party in which a film star has moved into the local area with her husband. And she's at this party and she's talking to like the film star, and a really weird look crosses the film star's face. And then I think Heather Babcock ends up like spilling her drink or something like that, so someone replaces her drink, and then like she dies at the party and everyone's just like, what has just happened? Bear in mind that a lot kind of happens in the beginning, in the build up to like this party, because there's a lot of talk of, you know, this new film star who's bought this house in the village, and there's talk of like Heather and all these sorts of different things. And yeah, so we're trying to find out why, like, well, what happened to Heather Babcock. Eventually find out like obviously someone killed her, and then like why would anyone want to kill her? She seems like such an insignificant person to have killed that it's just like, did she have any enemies? You know, of course they think it's the husband, but it's like obviously not. And it's all these things about trying to figure out why anyone would want to kill her. And it is just so genius the way the whole thing is done. And I think in this book it really allows Miss Marple to shine, in the sense that she is able to really go out into the village and find out things about Heather and her past in order to try and piece together what could have happened. And it's really interesting because the clues of her past are there, as well as the clues of the killer, and you're just like, oh okay, but you would be able to infer if you were thinking perhaps these people have met before, but the reason for the killing and what happened, you're just a bit like, oh, that's shocking. But also you can see why the person who killed her. And again, with these Miss Marple stories, it's so hard to talk about them without giving away the plot, because if I say she, he, like whatever, then you're bound to have a very narrow list of suspects for who could have killed her, which I don't think makes the reading experience as enjoyable. But I just thought it was a really well crafted one, and in terms of why the person did it. Sometimes people do things in like these Miss Marple novels and in like, you know, detective killer things that I would just be like, I just wouldn't kill for that, but everyone's obviously really different. Whereas in this one I can see it was such a personal thing that had happened to this person, all because you, Heather, you couldn't stay in your house, you know, and the consequences of that like just ripple through this person's life. So it's so strange that through this chance meeting that this person is actually like, damn, I didn't even know like it was you, but okay, now you're gonna die. So I actually just thought it was really cleverly done, but you could see the reasons why this person decided to carry it out like in this moment. And yeah, it was actually really well written. Because I listen to them as audiobooks, sometimes these books can feel very long, and personally I just feel like it's the Miss Marple ones, they can feel very long where it's just droning on for ages. And in the beginning it does do that, but I can see why once we sort of have the death and then we have the aftermath. I can see why sort of we needed that beginning bit to be able to be like, oh okay, because otherwise in the beginning it just feels like, why are we hearing about all these random people at such great length? So I do think out of the Miss Marple books, if you're going to read one, I would definitely read that one above all the other ones, because I think it definitely has a good making of like revenge thriller. And then I guess if you're going to watch it, if they've done the TV adaptation, which I'm sure they have, then you've probably got that party element, and they throw the party of all the glamour and stuff like that. But I think it has really good mechanics of a detective novel, but also with just like what life is like in the time, and also utilising Jane's sort of village knowledge and like her old lady status and like how she sort of gets information out of people. I thought all of that perfectly executed. So a really good one, 3 out of 5 stars. The other audiobook that I listened to is Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters, A Guide for Separation, Liberation and Inspiration by Karen C.L. Anderson. So I listened to this on Scribd, again for free, and I think this author actually has other books on this topic. I have a very difficult relationship with my mother. I say very difficult. Yeah. And I have been trying to read more literature sort of surrounding that, and this was free on Scribd, so I was like, why not give it a go? So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and like I said, she has other books sort of around this topic, and this one, I think your level of how much you enjoy this probably depends on how much literature you've read around this, you know, how many books and perhaps articles and things that you've read around sort of this sort of difficult relationship, because I haven't read a lot around it, so I found this very insightful. But when I just had to change the battery there, but I think I was saying that it depended on how many things of this sort of nature you had read, because some of the reviews I did think seemed to think that it wasn't that helpful because they had read other stuff and things like that. So what this book essentially is about, like it says in the sort of subtitle, is about that sort of liberation and stuff like that. Her whole point in this book is the fact that, you know, you don't have to like rebuild your relationship, or your mother doesn't have to like change in order for you to still have that sort of liberation and separation, and for you to feel like okay about that relationship. And it's really about the guidance of that, of how, in a way, I'm going to use the word detach, how you can detach from the sort of enmeshment that you might have with your parents. And a lot of this book I did think focused on enmeshment, which I don't really have, so I was a bit like but how you can sort of detach from that enmeshment and still feel okay. But she has some really helpful tips in there, in terms of, there were like journal prompts, but she was also bringing up examples that she had, but also examples from people that she had coached. So it was quite like varied in that sense, that it wasn't just like you should do this, you should do that. It was varied, that she was using her own experience, others' experience, and then also just having bits to sort of aid you and prompt you to think about certain things in your relationship as well. I think with most books that are self-help, it really is about creating that emotional sort of stability and creating boundaries, so that you as a person still feel like free, or like you don't feel guilty around setting sort of boundaries. And in this case, it's obviously specifically talking about mother, so she gives loads of examples in that case, and gives loads of examples of ways that you can create boundaries, and lets you know that it's okay to create those boundaries, and lets you know that obviously like sometimes they'll be angry, you will be angry, and like sometimes they won't always go to plan, but it's okay to set these boundaries, and it's okay to feel X feelings and stuff like that. So very much in the nature of self-help books, it really is about giving you, the reader, permission to sort of live the life that you need, and not always feeling like that you have to be sort of people-pleasing, and that's the only way, because usually when you're people-pleasing, then you're getting annoyed, and then it ends up just blowing up in your face and blowing up in that person's face. So it really is about that letting go of that guilt, and being like, you don't have to people please, you can set the boundaries that you need, and yeah, it might feel a bit uncomfortable at times, but you have permission to do so. She also has a section in this book that focuses on talking about like the story of your relationship with your mother and how you tell that story. I found that section quite interesting, but I also was a bit like, aren't you encouraging people to just lie? Like, I'm not saying people need to blab and tell every single thing, but you know, she was focused on the fact there was like 2 sides to each story. But I'm like, if someone has like done consistently wrong things, like that story is still the story. But she's talking about how you feel empowered by words and the things you say, and how you feel about that situation. I was a bit like, seems a bit dodgy to me. Like, I'm not I'm not gonna make the best of a bad situation, like just reframe the story when I actually know what happened. So that was a bit whatever. What I did like about this was she talked about sort of like remothering yourself, and I think if you do a lot of like shadow or like reparenting work or parenting work and stuff like that, I feel, is it called that? Then you'll sort of see sort of similarities in that, but that sort of allowing yourself to sort of decide your needs, and like how, looking back at certain situations, and how like you would sort of parent yourself in that situation, and just sort of learning more about your own desires and your needs, and things that you would naturally do, rather than things that perhaps you have been told to do in your childhood because of your mother. So it was a very interesting book. I really enjoyed it. I think the sort of freedom and permission to be is what like I needed from that book, and it definitely gave me that, and I would like to explore sort of more books around this topic. But because, like I said, of where I am in my journey of reading books of this nature, I found this very insightful. I did find it was really helpful. A lot of her talk is about, you know, like how therapy perhaps doesn't address some of these situations. I don't know that to be the case, and I think she is also a coach on these things, so perhaps that's why she's a bit like biased on it, but other than that, I thought it was really helpful. I thought it was insightful, and it's something that I would definitely read again. So the non-fiction book that we're going to speak about is You Were Born for This: Astrology for Radical Self-Acceptance by Cheney Nicholas. So this was actually recommended to me by someone. Well, not recommended to me. Someone was saying that they were reading this, and I was like, oh, like, because they were saying how it makes like astrology like very simple, and I was like, oh, I'd like to like read that so I can know a little bit more about it, because I know my star sign, and I think, like, I'm a Taurus, and Taurus is notoriously known for being stubborn, and I'm 100% super stubborn. But there are like loads of other traits as well that I feel like I do resonate with, but I'm just like, I mean, you've put there, what, 12 star signs are there? See, that's how much I don't know about it. Like, generally, as human beings, we're going to have some sort of similarity. So I just really wanted to know more about it, because this breaks it down more into other aspects, like your rising sign, what is it, your sun, moon and rising. And just because of like the way that my life is moving, I've become like more into these sorts of things, but like at the same time I don't really have like the baseline or the foundational knowledge for astrology and stuff like that, and I just low-key think it's just a bit like So I really wanted to like read this book, and this book is actually quite interesting. It really does break it down. So Cheney Nicholas is an astrologer, I guess that's what they call themselves, yeah, astrologer. And it says here, she shows you how your birth chart, a snapshot of the sky at the moment you took your first breath, reveals the unique challenges, talents and opportunities. Fortified with this knowledge, you can live out the life you were born to. So it says here your sun is your life's purpose. So your sun for me is my Taurus, that's like the one that most people know. And then your moon is your physical and emotional needs, and then your ascendant and its ruler, the motivation for life and the steer person of your ship. So that is your rising sign. So I know that my star sign is obviously Taurus. I don't know exactly when I was born. My mum said it was at 3:30, but my mum likes to tell fibs, so I don't actually know if it's at 3:30. Like, when I say tell fibs, I mean I think she just doesn't know. Instead of saying I don't know, she'll just tell you that. But she was like, oh, just phone the hospital and ask. And I thought, do the hospital and they'll be like, oh, do we have time for this, you kooky bitch? But so yeah, I think I have a Leo rising, and I cannot remember what my moon is, but I'll pop it up on the screen by the time I have this. But what this does, so you can go to her website and you can fill in your details of stuff like when you were born and all those sorts of things, and where you were born and all these things, and then it produces the chart. So actually what I will do as well in this video is put my chart on the side. I'll put it right here, and then from that chart you can use this book to find out all sorts of things. So I don't know if it's better if I might just do like a cutaway where I show you the insides of the book, because she just breaks it down and it says like the basics. So this book is like 300 and something pages long. No, that's a lie. It's like 250 pages long. You will not read the entire of this book, because essentially, well, if you read it like me, you're only going to read the bits that are relevant to you. But it says like the basics, and it says who the planets and stuff like that, and it tells you about like the sort of different signs and things like that, because you might have those signs in your chart, so you'll need to like look at what they are. So what the book also has, yeah, I'll definitely do cutaways, is there are sections that you can fill out, and it's like, for me it says here, my sun is in the sign of Taurus, and my sun is in the 10th house, and the 10th house is career and public roles. So it was the houses that your sun is in which became the most interesting to me, because essentially the house that is in, sort of, I guess what they're saying is your life's purpose, and mine would be career and public roles. Guys, I have never thought of work as being that deep. Like, obviously everyone needs to work to like have money and stuff like that, and I say like you don't need to, that's not my belief that you need to, but in this life it seems that's what we're told to do. But like in terms of like being a CEO and stuff like that, this is not in my line of vision. I don't want to work that hard, I'm sorry, I like sleep. But my sun being in Taurus and my house being in the 10th means that career is an area where like that's where I'm meant to excel in, which I found very interesting. I'm not against it, I just didn't think it would be that. So what the book does is sort of say your sun in Gemini, your sun in Taurus, and it will tell you things about like your star sign, essentially those the things that people generally know about their star sign. And then it does go on to talk about your sun in your 3rd house, your sun in your whatever house. So the 10th house is a place of career, public roles, prominence and reputation. The sun in the 10th house must manifest itself out in the world. With your sun here, you must shed your light in places and spaces where it will be seen. There is nowhere to hide in the 10th house. Here everything is public, and either your personality is used as a vehicle for your profession, or your identity is tied to the roles that you occupy in the world. You may or may not be comfortable in the spotlight, but with the sun in the 10th house you must make peace with it at some point, as you'll either be thrust into it or feel a sense of unlived potential by refusing it. And that's just absolutely hilarious to me, because like I am not comfortable in the spotlight. I didn't ever think like I would use my career as like the thing, but it has been pointed out to me that like the career that I'm in now, like I have basically worked since like before uni to sort of get into it. So it's driven in that sense, but I don't know, I don't see me being big or CEO, like I don't see that. But anyway, it goes through so many other bits of it. So it talks about your moon, it talks about the relationship with other planets, and all of this makes more sense when you have your chart, because you can see all the different things. And this really just break it down. And the reason why I feel like you won't read the whole book is because it's like, for example, here it says moon in the 9th house, moon in the 10th house. If you don't have a moon in the 9th house, then like more than likely you're not going to read it. Initially when I was reading this, I did like read all the sort of sun in Gemini, sun in Leo, and all those sorts of stuff, and after I was like, this doesn't relate to me, like this doesn't refer to me, I'm not reading it. So it is a relatively easy one to get through, and I do think she does break it down in really simple ways to help you understand like what these things are supposed to say. So I find it very enjoyable. Since reading it, like it's shifted my mind a little bit about how I think of astrology. I'm still not really into it, I'm not gonna lie. I think once people seem to get into it, there's a lot to keep up with, and I just feel like how much of that is you just going about your daily life versus reading this and being like, oh, this is this then. And I just think like it becomes too complicated, and I feel like a lot of the times when I see things on Instagram, it then becomes like people are relying on things or using it as a explanation of why they're feeling certain ways, whereas sometimes I think, oh, it's just life, like you're just rolling with the punches. So I don't know, but this is a really broken down accessible guide. So if you're interested in just finding out about your sun, moon and rising and your birth chart, and where different planets might have been in your chart when you were born and things like that, and what that might mean for your life, I would get this. It's really accessible and really easy to read. And by the way, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I'm going to speak about is Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. This was a book club read for the book club that I'm part of, well, another book club that I'm part of. When I first read this, I thought, oh, this sounds really good, like this sounds right up my street, and it is like a book that I probably would have picked for myself, but I've never heard of it, so this is perfect. Yeah, you know, the 2 out of 5 stars makes you think, what went wrong? But it says here, a provocative, actually ignore that, oh yeah, wait. It's a book about a beloved English professor facing a slew of accusations against her professor husband by former students, a situation that becomes more complicated when she herself develops an obsession of her own. And then it says here in speech marks, when I was a child I loved old men and I could tell they also loved me. And that is actually the sort of opening line to the main character's book that she is writing. And it says here, so we're introduced to a deliciously incisive narrator, a popular English professor whose charismatic husband at the same small liberal arts college is under investigation for his inappropriate relationship with his former students. The couple have had a mutual understanding when it comes to their extramarital pursuits, but with these new allegations, life has become far less comfortable for them. And when our narrator becomes increasingly infatuated with Vladimir, a celebrated married young novelist who's just arrived on campus, their Tinderbox world becomes dangerously close to exploding. The reason why I read that is because I said in one of my book haul videos about blurbs often being much better than the book. This is a case of that. This blurb makes this book sound so exciting. The book is so boring. First of all, we have our narrator who is never named, and it's obviously done for a reason to not give her a name. She's a woman, I guess she's middle-aged, and yes, her husband is facing these slew of accusations. It's really not the main focus of the book, which I'm glad, because it's told from her perspective, and it's like, it's not happening to her, it's happening to her husband. They, of course, like it says in the back, have this arrangement, like he's allowed to sleep with other students and stuff like that. I think what has happened, I can't remember it completely now, I don't know if it's that the age of the girls is sort of borderline like and like he old man, or if I don't know if there's sense of abuse. It's one or the two, and I'm sorry, I just can't remember at the moment because it was so irrelevant and uninteresting to me. So that's what's happening, and obviously she's like standing by him because like I think a lot of people want her to be shocked and disgusted because he's been pursuing all these affairs, but she knows that, and you find sort of later in the book, and perhaps this is like a spoiler, but I don't think it's too much of a spoiler, like she is actually the one that sort of stopped like them getting closer and having any more sex and told him to go and have like relationships and stuff with other people, because she'd reached this point where she was just like, she didn't want him to reach a point where he found her unattractive, so she put up this rule and stopped it at a point where she thought she was ugly and like unattractive, I suppose, so that he wouldn't get to that point and reject her, which I get, but at the same time it's like, oh, okay. So that's why they have it. And she's had like a couple of affairs and stuff like that, and it will go through and mentioned in the book and stuff like that. So a lot of people want her to be shocked by that, but she's just like, well, that was our arrangement. Like, for me, this is not a surprise, but obviously it's different in terms of these women and the sort of role they think he plays in sense of being a professor and someone in a role of responsibility. So that's sort of what the book is navigating. And at the same time, they're sort of navigating things to do with their daughter and like what she's like. And then of course Vladimir, this guy who comes in, and they're talking about like her obsession with him. I just like, I was reading the book, I was like, I don't really feel like she's that obsessed with him. Like, I feel she's a bit like, she's jumped a lot of spots, but they seem to be flirting, so I'm just a bit like, okay. The best thing about this book was when they talked about like her buying food and her cooking food with her daughter, and like when she's at a cabin and things like that. Those were the best descriptions of in the book, like the best pages in the book. And like as a book club, we all agreed, because we were just like, everything else was rubbish. The book was just honestly quite dull. Like, I was just like, why is this happening? And I feel like this is really what makes people not like literary fiction, when books are just really slow and dull as this. It was just like, so what's gonna happen next? We get to this ending, which is just like, whoa. Like, it took me by surprise. I was just like, Lord, what is going on? And I don't want to ruin it, because I think it's one of those things where you need to read and experience for yourself. But I was like, that just came out of nowhere. I don't know why this happened. I don't know what Vladimir is playing at. I don't know what the husband is playing at. I don't know what you, the narrator, is playing at. Everything was just wild, and I just thought, for a book that was so tame, the ending just went pfft, and I was just like, I was not ready for this. Like, I just wasn't ready for this. I don't even really understand why it happened. For me, it was just a really, really strange book. I think the book was meant to be sensual and all of these things. I didn't feel any of that. I felt all the characters were so dead. Like, they were so uninteresting. Every single one of them. Vladimir sounded so boring. His wife sounded so boring. And you could tell that he was just lying about some of the stuff of what his wife is like. Her husband sounded so boring. Like, some things happened in that book and I was just like, Lord, do you not love yourself, narrator? Like, why? Her daughter seemed like a spoiled prick. Just every character you came into contact with, you were just like, what the hell? Like, who are these people? Like, the book was honestly not that enjoyable, and it's hard to like talk about certain aspects of the book without then like spoiling the book for people. So I'm just going to leave my thoughts there. But those are the 4 books that I wanted to talk about. I've read them at various points during the year. Like, this one was definitely very much early in the year, but I just realised I hadn't spoken about it and I really wanted to, whereas the rest have been a bit more of recent reads. But let me know if you have read any of these books as usual, and I will see you in another video. Bye.